Good morning and welcome to Hambledon Hill and welcome to the 60th Presents. My name's Stefan, this is Corporal Margaret. Hello. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the uniforms and equipment worn by the 60th Regiment of Foot during the French and Indian Wars. Corporal Margaret's standing before you wearing, well, he's basically undressed by 18th century standards. We start at the top. He's wearing his shirt. Now, this is a very simple item. It's quite baggy. It's very kind of loosely cut, usually made from linen, or if you're quite well off, maybe cotton. This is basically his underclothes, his minimum item of clothing. It would be closed at the collar by perhaps a tie or a button, and then, as you can see, Corporal Margaret's wearing a stock, which is a piece of tailored fabric which closes the collar of the shirt. He's also wearing a pair of blue breeches. These breeches are in royal blue. Royal blue is the regimental colour of the 60th Regiment of Foot. And then below his breeches he's wearing a pair of black gaiters. Now, it would be quite rare to see a soldier wearing his shirt and his gaiters walking around. We'll talk about why that is for a second, but the reason we've got him in his gaiters already is because if you look at the sides, you can see the gaiters have 20 buttons, and frankly none of us have time to watch him do up all 40 buttons between the two gaiters. The gaiters are there to protect his hose, his stockings, which are much like mine, to protect them from getting snagged on undergrowth, damaged by grass, or detritus on the floor and that kind of thing. And then he has a pair of black shoes with a simple buckle to close them. What I'm going to ask Corporal Margaret to do now is to put on his next item of clothing, which is his waistcoat. During the 18th century, you would not want to be seen out wearing just your shirt. It was seen as being quite uncivilised, or not the kind of thing a respectable person would do. That's not to say people didn't just wear shirts. If you were a manual labourer, if you were working in the field and it was a hot day, then yeah, of course, you might take off your upper layers and just work in your shirt. Think about it as being like, perhaps wearing or working topless today. If you're working on working on the roads maybe, or working outside in the garden on a hot day, you might take off your shirt. Similar in the 18th century, you might just take off your waistcoat to give you that little bit of cooling. The waistcoat is in madder red wool, which is the colour that gave the British their name, the Redcoats, for which British soldiers are famous. And it's in a very straightforward, simple cut. It's a very simple garment. It has two pockets. There isn't much more to say about it, but as you see him now, it's pretty much how the minimum that he'd be willing to wear to walk around camp and get on with his daily chores. Would you like to put your coat on? Sure. Next we see the regimental coat. Now this is made from madder red wool, again this time lined with blue, again lined with royal blue. This coat is made from 2 layers of wool. On a scorching hot day like today, I'm sure you can imagine, it's quite a warm item of clothing. Again, the royal blue, the reason the 60th wore royal blue is because they were formed on the orders of King George II on Christmas Eve 1755. And the colour royal blue was associated with royal regiments, so that's why the 60th wear that colour. This is a fairly standard military coat at the time. It's very long in cut, with the tails clipped back to show off the lining. And as you say, it is quite a warm item of clothing. If in cold weather, the two facings can be buttoned across to give you a little bit of extra warmth. But otherwise, it's quite heavy and a fairly warm piece of kit. And this is, with the exception of his hat, so let's put his hat on. And now with his tricorn on his head, this is how Corporal Margaret will be dressed in his full uniform. This is the uniform that was issued to the soldiers. Now, before we move on, something that's worth noting is that the 60th fought in North America, and as I'm sure you can imagine, at various times of year, the long coat, the tails became quite inconvenient. If you imagine running through woodland, it's going to be a problem. And similarly with the hat, actually this is going to be an issue. And so the 60th developed their uniforms, cutting down the coats, trimming the hats to form more effective, more practical pieces of equipment. Maybe in another video we'll discuss that, but it's just something to think about now. What I think we'll do next is if we start to look at some of the field equipment that he would wear, sort of the 18th century equivalent of his webbing or belt kit. So if we start with the waist belt. And this is a buff leather belt worn around the waist and closed with a big heavy-duty brass clasp. Now, as you can see, the belt's a bit of a pain to put on with the coat on, and of course, if we weren't standing in a field in front of you, we might take the jacket off, might do this wearing just the waistcoat. But the waist belt carries a short sword, a short soldier's sword called a hanger, and a bayonet. Now again, these are two items that would often be modified by soldiers in the field. Many soldiers would perhaps ditch their sword in favour of an axe. The sword is quite an archaic piece of equipment. It was more symbolic. It symbolised that the man was a soldier rather than an ordinary person on the street. Soldiers carried swords, so that's what it's a symbol of. However, in North America, your sword is going to be fairly useless. They are very rarely used in combat, much more likely to end up being used as a camp tool or simply thrown away and replaced. The bayonet, on the other hand, was a relatively modern invention. Up until the early 18th century, people had used plug bayonets or simply turned their muskets round and hit people on the head. The socket bayonet, which would fit over the muzzle of the musket and allow you to fire even with the bayonet fitted, was relatively new and was turned the musket into quite a potent hand-to-hand weapon. In fact, as you can imagine, adding 17 inches of sharpened steel to any kind of firearm is going to make it rather formidable. Next item of equipment Corporal Margaret's going to put on is his cartridge box. And this is worn on a simple cross belt across the body, and then can be secured using the epaulette on the left side of his jacket. And this box would contain his ammunition, which would be made up of cartridges, so a quantity of black powder and a lead ball wrapped in paper that would then be, that is the ammunition for his gun. He'd carry a number of these, usually 60 or so, that he could then use during the course of battle. The only items we have left really are what we might consider his personal equipment. So Corporal Margaret has a white haversack that he can sling onto his shoulder, and this would carry things like his rations, so his bread, maybe his meat for the day, and anything he needed access to, maybe personal items. Perhaps if he could read a Bible, maybe he might have a spoon or some cooking equipment in there. This is where he'd carry his personal items, and perhaps if he were going into battle, this might get thrown into some sort of baggage train or into some sort of safe place where it would be stored up until the end of the battle. And then finally, a canteen. Canteen's an important item of equipment for a soldier because we all need water, particularly in warm weather. But this is particularly significant because when you're firing your musket, you bite off the ball of your cartridge, and you inevitably end up with a quantity of black powder in your mouth. Black powder contains saltpeter, which dries your mouth out very quickly, makes you very thirsty. So soldiers during battles would be often be desperate for a drink of water, and so that canteen would be of immense value during any lulls in the battle.
It's also the last item to put on, so it's the first that's available. So if you have a burn or need that drink or wash your mouth, then that's the first thing that's available.
Exactly. And finally, you have Corporal Margaret's musket, which is a long lamb pattern brown bess of the style that was used by the British forces during the French and Indian War. And so, here we have Corporal Margaret, fully equipped, ready to go on the march, move to his next battle, or even simply go on sentry duty. How would you describe the weight and the feel of the equipment you're wearing?
Everything is fairly heavy, but it's well spread across your body, so the weight distribution is good. The coat, although heavy, will breathe well in the summer and very warm in winter. So it is a heavy but practical.
It's interesting to think that actually, even fully equipped, Corporal Margaret's not going to be carrying a huge amount. Even if his haversack was full of rations, even carrying a full load of ammunition, he's not going to be carrying more than perhaps 20 kilos. When you compare that to the weight that soldiers carry today, including things like body armour, ammunition, water, rations, radios and so on, it's actually reasonably lightly equipped. And perhaps that's an interesting point to leave this, just comparing the equipment that we see before us with perhaps what you're used to seeing on television, in the news, or in popular media. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the 60th Presents by the 60th Regiment of Foot Living History Group, a part of New France, Old England. If you're interested in anything that we've said or anything that we're doing today, please do contact us. Our details will be in the comments section of the video, as well as links to our website and the website of New France, Old England. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.